Everything was gifted to us by Creator. Our DNA is made out of the same DNA as the tree. The tree breathes what we exhale, and we need what the tree exhales. So we have a common destiny with the tree. And that explains how we believe that we are connected to everything. When the earth, the water, and the atmosphere is corrupted, then it will create its own reaction. Our Mother Earth is reacting. There are prophecies that warn that the storms and the floods will become greater. To me, it's not a negative thing to know that there will be great changes. It's evolution. When you look at it as evolution, you realize nothing stays the same. The moon teaches us that it's okay to go through phases. The sun teaches us that no matter how many times you go down, you keep rising. That's just something for you to think about. What I'd like to do now is say a prayer, give you a blessing, and then I'll leave directly after. Gizok, Great Spirit, good creator of all things, grandmothers and grandfathers of the 4 sacred directions and 4 sacred races, please hear our humble prayer. We offer prayers for those that are grieving and those who are sick, and for those who are traveling on the dark road of abuse. Please give them comfort and strength and guidance to find the healing red road. We pray for strength and courage to work toward growth and positive change. We give thanks for the resilience you give to us in our times of need. We give thanks for the courage of our hearts and our minds that empower our potential for healing. Gizok, we acknowledge the gift of the 2 spirit people you have given us. They have the gift of seeing the world from 2 points of view. Help us acknowledge and accept that when the dawn of a new day arises, it arises for all your children. We give thanks for the gift of life and for those who give of themselves to protect our freedoms. Walalan for our Mother Earth, who provides us all that is needed to live. Walalan for the sacred water for quenching our thirst and helping things to grow. Walalan for the 4 sacred winds that give us air, the breath of life. Walalan for the sacred fire, the sun that gives us light and warmth. Walalan for all our relations, the 4-legged, winged ones, swimmers and crawlers, and plants and rocks that enable our nations to live today. We teach our children to honor our Mother Earth and our sacred waters. We do this, Gizok, so that our future generations will have a safe place to live and grow. Sit Nokmak, all my relations. Tao. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for being with us today and for sharing your knowledge and for offering this blessing. We really value you and appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. Have a good meeting, everyone.
Thank you. So this lecture series, our engagement with racism here really comes at a very critical time, as of course, Black Lives Matter protests have once again rallied around the calls that the lives of Black and Indigenous and other communities of color, that they're not expendable, also calling for reform of law enforcement and other public institutions. And it's also a time where planners and architects have to reflect on how our own practices have really aided in the loss of life and the loss of property for these same communities. So for us as designers and architects and planners and activists, this means really questioning how design spaces are very much embedded with power structures that stratify our society, and how practitioners are sometimes really implicated in this. So just as importantly, we also have to acknowledge that this is really not a new conversation. It's not a new area of analysis, and that communities of color have really continually engaged in this kind of work through daily experiences in urban spaces, and also by resisting oppressive regimes and policies. And these racialized communities have really developed their own planning and design practices and practices of activism and resistance in cities when they haven't been heard by the faces of power. So this lecture series really builds on this summer's kind of powerful response to racialized violence by presenting the work of practitioners, of activists, and of scholars who have pursued these kinds of acts of anti-racism as a very central focus of their work. So our goal here is to really make connections and find synergies between these very diverse practices that are going to provide some new insights in some of our pursuits for racial justice, both in our cities, in our practice, and also in our activism. And so before I turn it over to Catherine Vennart, who's going to introduce our speakers, I just like to ask everyone to make sure that their microphone is off, and also just to ensure that the stream here goes uninterrupted, if you'd like to turn off your video as well. And then the last thing I'll say is that we're going to end this panel with a Q&A session. So please type any of the questions that you have at any point in the panel into the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm just going to go over quickly the schedule and introduce the panel tonight. So the event that's happening tonight is will take the form of a series of questions, which enable the panelists to introduce both their work and to create a discussion about how, in a way, the practices are informed by various forms of knowledge exchange through active engagement with communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I would like to welcome our panelists. First, excuse my pronunciation, I'm not very good at pronouncing words, period. But so DeRico Symonds,
DeRico Symonds.
Symonds, thank you. DeRico Symonds. And then there's Juanita Peters and Mr. Kroeker. Do you want me to introduce them as well, Lisa, or? Okay, I can. DeRico Symonds works with the municipal government as a youth and community advocacy of social justice issues. Juanita Peters is executive director of the Africville Museum, an award-winning playwright, actor, and film director. Through each of these roles, she tells the story of the Black community. And Richard Kroeker is an architect from the UK and a professor emeritus here from Dell, whose design thinking pursues an architecture that engages with the communities of various cultures under threat. So thank you for agreeing to participate, and I very much look forward to hearing from each of you and the following discussion. Now I would like to hand over the mic, I guess, in a way, to the moderator for tonight's events, which is Isoma Mafia. I probably also butchered your name, I'm sorry.
Hi, how you guys doing? You guys can turn your mic on now, I guess.
We're doing great, EC.
So our first question is gonna be, just give us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your work and how you mobilize or engage with community knowledge. Can each of you describe your work in terms of how it engages with community narratives, arts, advocacy, and designed to critically address injustices and systematic racism? And I guess we'll start with Juanita.
Of course.
And
well, let me just start by saying I work the way that I live, and my life, started out very different than a lot of people, especially if you live in Atlantic Canada. So I grew up in downtown Toronto in the 1960s when everybody was from everywhere else in the world. And when I show my class picture to most students, they'll say, oh, there's no diversity there, because they see what they think is light skin. And I say, au contraire, this is the most diverse my life has ever been. These folks were from the former Yugoslavia. These people were from the Ukraine. These people were from Israel. And they were all first generation. And so the way that I live is I'm always asking people, that question that we take negatively in Atlantic Canada, where are you from? Because everybody was coming from somewhere else. And my next question was, how do you say my name in your language? And then the most important question of all, do you celebrate Christmas? You know, or what do you celebrate? What are the things that are important to you? And that's the way that I have always lived. I still live that way. And even in, I would say there are times when other people might feel that I'm asking questions of people that they may not want to answer. I never feel that I'm intruding unless someone says to me, oh, you know, I'm not comfortable speaking about that, or I don't want to talk about that. I don't take offense to that. I think the only way that we learn is by connecting with people. I think that we have more connections with all people than not. And if you start off in that way, I think that, you know, there's a gravitational pull that happens, you know, where like-minded people or tend to gravitate towards each other, and people that are seeking information gravitate to each other. And I think that that, you know, shows up in my work in a number of different ways. I've never always known how to tackle certain subjects, but I try to speak honestly, you know, in terms of how I see it, or lay it out for other people to dissect it and start conversations. Sometimes it's just about that. It's about opening the doors, you know, for conversation. So I'll leave it at that for me for now.
Thank you very much for your answer. I guess we'll go to Richard. So what are your, so do you want me to repeat the question again, or do you want to speak about it?
Yeah, you better restate the question.
All right, perfect. So it's, tell us about your work and how you mobilize or engage your community in knowledge. Can you, each of you, describe your work in terms of how it engages the community narrative, art, advocacy, and design to critically address injustices and systematic racism?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. I'm going to try to cut to the chase. I'm an architect. I've had I guess my fascination with architecture is in that you're in the world of ideas, but they're ideas that have a material consequence. And so when you have an idea, you know, you have to think how that works itself out in time and space. And before going into architecture, I had this sort of understanding of architecture, probably fairly accurate, that by and large, architecture is an instrument for concentrating power and wealth. And that's how sometimes architecture gets taught in academies. We study how the powerful and the wealthy through history, from one empire to another empire, built things. I guess my value system runs a bit counter to that. I mean, I was interested in what Juanita said about her very background. Well, I'm a first generation immigrant from some dire circumstances. My parents and grandparents were Russian Mennonites, so they came from a sort of disempowered, disenfranchised group to Canada, to the mainstream, and architecture wasn't on the kind of list of possible professions. But when I went into architecture, I was interested in how architecture could also address issues related to community empowerment, to equality, to economic and social justice, equal access to resource. And so that's been also the focus of my teaching. I'm also interested in histories and what histories get told and what histories don't get told, because again, our discipline is deeply rooted in histories. And so this has led me to working with a number of communities in different cultures. at some point, maybe I'll show a little bit of that work. At least some of it is activist work, and some of it is directly design work. It's been in North America as well as Canada, United States, Africa, and also in Europe. So I think maybe I'll leave it at that, but I'm interested in, first of all, in the community consultation aspect. I think it's really important how you make that connection to a community, that you were there by invitation, for example, and that the community themselves, have invited you to participate with them. Also, the people to whom you consult the proper elders, the properly constituted authorities that have the authority rooted in their own community, and that you honor that. That the way that you use any information you receive is apparent to everyone. And particular that, and I was pleased that, for example, the elder opened the meeting tonight. I think always the knowledge holders and the elders have to be honored and present in whatever community work you do. And the beginning is always finding those channels and working with the whole community, but through the elders.
Thank you very much for your answer. So I guess last but not least, DeRico, you need to repeat the question again, or you good?
I think I'm good. I had some time to hear it twice, so I think I'm good.
All right, perfect.
Well, the first thing I want to say is just certainly acknowledge, what's happening to our Indigenous brothers and sisters in Saulnieville. Been following that pretty closely, and I, just want to acknowledge, definitely in solidarity with the Mi'kmaq community. So just 10 seconds about myself, so there's a little bit of background in terms of where I'm coming from. Is that the BA in Child and Youth Study, and MED in Counseling, and certified therapist. And since this panel, I recently changed jobs, and so I'm no longer with municipal government. I'm at NASCAD. I'm the Director of Opportunity and Belonging at the college. And a lot of the work that I do inside and outside of my place of employment is community work, grassroots on the ground, dealing with, and particularly social justice issues. And so addressing this question, I would say that, how I mobilize and engage with community certainly does depend on which community I'm engaging with. However, there are particular sort of guidelines that I try to follow for simple engagement. And one being understanding the context and the community by which I'm working in. The African Nova Scotian community context certainly would be different from working with Indigenous community. And so those are things I have to understand before going in to do the work. So that may mean research, education, talking with people, etc. Two, finding community champions. So who are the folks in the community who are the leaders, who are the champions, who have been doing the work before me, or who are doing the work currently. Building a team within the community. So after I find the champions, can they bring more community members to the table? Establish a plan of action, map out who the people are that we need at the table to make the change that we're talking about, and turn that plan into action. And a few guidelines to sort of keep in mind while doing this work is centering the community voice. And community are experts in their own lives. Certainly a guest going into community, and I don't know everything. In fact, I know nothing when I'm going into someone's community. And I would say that for the part around, how my work engages with community narratives, art, etc., and addresses injustice of systemic racism, I would say that it there's been plenty of folks, many folks who have been doing this work well before me, and certainly that saying of standing on shoulders of giants, of ancestry, and I would say that the work addresses systemic racism, but it's difficult to overcome a system that in its inception was not built to work for people like me, people that look like me. And what I mean by that is that in the inception of any system that we can think of, education, justice, health, any system, when these systems were being dreamed about and being born, people of color at the time were considered property. And so people creating these systems were not thinking, well, what ideas, what thoughts, what opinions do folks of color believe in for this system to work? And so systemic racism is certainly complex, and it's not saying that everyone, that there are racist folks in the system. It's just saying that in its inception, these systems were not in its origin created to work for people of color. And now we're at a place right now where we're working to actively dismantle these systems. It's like trying to put a square into a circle, because it was never meant in its inception to actually work that way. And so I think that the community work that I'm doing is sort of a direct attack and a direct conversation and a direct discussion to how we can unpack that and how we can center the most marginalized voices in the conversation to move forward.
Perfect, because that actually leads into the next question that we're going to ask, which is about systematic racism and how systematic racism impacts your work, your practice, and in terms of validating or employing, engaging with community knowledge. You've kind of gone a little bit into answering that question a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe continuing or passing it over to someone else to answer. But this question is for all three of you guys to discuss about and kind of, I guess, give your own opinion on how this whole thing has happened. Because systematic racism has been occurring since the 1700s in what used to be the Atlantics, because Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, those places were all connected at some point. So I would like for you guys to kind of discuss your thoughts on how systematic racism has impacted your work practice in validating or employing or engaging with community knowledge. Any one of you guys can start.
Okay, so I think that systemic racism certainly has shaped the work that I do by way of understanding how the inception of these systems and how these systems in their very intention when they were being built, what they were meant to do, and the systems in their intention were built and meant to oppress particular groups of people. And working, living, and playing in that system, you learn to adapt to the system that you're working in, so that you have particular strategies to navigate the world of a place that oftentimes you feel as though you don't belong. And so putting your stake down in that system and moving through with conviction to create a better place for everybody is sort of how I've learned to continue to do the work. And yeah, anyway, I'll stop there. I don't want to ramble too much.
Thank you. Do you, Richard, or Juanita want to answer or continue this conversation as well?
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. And I want to pick up on something else that DeRico, when DeRico was talking about education, and I love that. You're absolutely right, DeRico. And one of the things that's really debilitating is that if you have not had the opportunity to see how other countries treat education, you would never know that there was a way for you to succeed in a much faster way, equally unless you saw their systems. And I based that on a wonderful conversation I had years ago with a Dr. Iwama from Acadia University. And we were just talking about specific little things that were going on. And he said to me, I just always, found it strange that in North America, first of all, you grade children. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, in Hawaii, we don't grade children. I said, well, how do they learn? He said, you just keep giving them the things that they do well until they finish it, until they finish all the books on that subject. And then and so that particular individual is always learning at their speed that they need to on the subjects that they advance it. And then you bring in the other things. And he says, and we don't penalize students for not doing well in something else. The other thing he said was, North Americans tend to look at education as something that was elitist prior to the 60s. He said, and we look at it as just an opportunity. You're only going to go into the things that you're interested in. It's not about making more money or being elitist or so on and so forth. Now I'll get to the next question. Again, because I think grew up in a different environment, I didn't realize that things were happening to me. And I based that on a conversation that I had as recently, 2020, as 2016, as recently as 2016. I have a really great friend who is still my friend, who at one time was a supervisor. I started my career in the newsroom as a news reporter. And I became the legislative reporter in Fredericton at the age of 22 years of age. At 24, I had had enough of the newsroom for a little while. And I decided I just wanted a 9-to-5 job where I could walk in and leave work when I left. And so I took a job as a full-time writer for CHSJ TV. And when the day that I did not know this until 2016, the head of the writer's room, her name was Jane Mantle, who became a very, very good friend of mine, told me in 2016, she's now in her late 70s. She said, the day that you were hired, the manager came in and said, I found the perfect person for the job. There's only one problem. And she said, I saw her, hire her. And he said, I have to make a phone call. I don't know who he made the phone call to. She didn't know who he made the phone call to. But the answer that came back, I want you to mark this, it was 1983. The answer that came back was hire her, but don't let her be seen. And then she told me a whole array of things that had happened in my 7 years at that television station that I was not aware of. And I wrote about this most recently. And one of them was the fact that my office, the writer's room, was a beautiful room. It was on the second floor of the building, overlooking Union Street. My office was in the basement of the building. I just thought they didn't have any seats left in the writer's room. But I was put in the broom closet and they decorated it. They put a desk in there. I was what really became 3 flights away from the rest of the writers. I actually loved it because I was down there with the people who were creating the sets for the television station. So I'm talking to the artists and the painters and the carpenters and the designers. I loved it, but who knew that that was the purpose? In terms of how I dealt with it, I didn't know it was happening. So, all I know is that when I decided that I wanted to change gears and advance, it didn't happen there, but I never ever thought it had anything to do. It never even occurred to me that it was that. So Juanita, I just kept on my track. It's like, I want to do this, so I'll go over here and write in the day. And I went over there at night and created my television show across the street with the competitors. It was 2 different unions. I was in the Writers Guild in the daytime and the Performers Guild across the street at night. So it wasn't even competing. But, today, I think it's about informing yourself, in a way that, you constantly feel like you have to protect yourself from something. Nova Scotia is very different. You know, my main career originally was in New Brunswick. And when I came to Nova Scotia, I absolutely knew something was different here. So you're constantly putting on some form of armor. You're constantly thinking, how do I navigate this? Usually it's waiting to hear what's going to happen around you and building a strategy in a way that you can educate.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. So Richard, I guess we're going to move it a little bit towards.
I'm going to go to screen share. Just I hope this works all right. I want to talk a bit about the role that the university and the academy has to play in as an activist role in the issues related to racism, social justice, and so on. So just a brief travel through a project. I was a guest professor in University of Minnesota while also teaching at Dalhousie. And this is a kind of map of a place in Minnesota. That little green patch is a very valuable piece of real estate. It's also the heartland of Dakota and all the Sioux nations. It's their most sacred spot, and because it's overlooking the Mississippi and Mendota rivers. And it's a contested ground because at the time that I started the studio, it was in the hands of a private developer and drawings had already been approved to build a subdivision there. And there was a lot of racial tension around it. Dakota people were forbidden to set foot on the land. The dean warned me that I shouldn't have anything to do with it. It would cause a lot of trouble. And so, of course, then I said, okay, I must work on that. And in the course of that studio, the students were asked to come up with alternate proposals for that site that would acknowledge it as a sacred place and as an asset to the whole nation, Dakota Nation first, and then to everyone. And in the course of doing that studio, this is the site here. It's overlooking, you can see downtown Minneapolis. They hadn't had a sacred ceremony on that site since the occupation by American forces in 1862. This is, the people had been rounded up and forbidden to go to the site. So the first thing that we did, because I was working under the auspices of the university, I got permission from the city and everyone to have a sacred ceremony on the site. So together with the local Dakota community and our students at the university, we helped, under the supervision of the elders, we built a sweat lodge on that site to hold a sacred ceremony presided over by Elder Chris Leaf, who gave permission to take these photos, by the way. And so we had a sacred ceremony for the first time in over a century. Then following on from that, we convened a symposium that went on for 3 days, where we brought in Dakota elders, we brought in lawyers, all the lawyers concerned with that site, we brought in the city officials, the politicians, and we brought in historians. And we talked through what that site could be and how it could be honored and brought into broader public awareness as a sort of a sacred place going back thousands of years. And through that kind of symposium and getting people to talk together, the city suspended development on that site. They faced big legal battles with the developer. However, they ended up paying out the developer and that site was set aside. And so it was through, in a way, through the university that action could be initiated. And of course, it involved many players and many disciplines, but the role of the academy, I would say, was fundamental in introducing an idea, seeing what its consequence could be, and then bringing all the players to the table to talk things through in a way that presented a vision and wasn't just about the differences and perpetuating those kind of frictions. So that's I won't show all, of course, all the student work that was done and so on, but I think the academy has an important, not just a role to play, but a kind of responsibility. First of all, in addressing historic issues, and we have the possibility to bring many different people to the table that I think in this case led to positive results.
Perfect.
I'm going to maybe just to bring it home a bit earlier. I'm not going to take too much more time, but just bring it home to Halifax. This was a project I did with students back to do with our local history. I'm just going to. So I think we all know the history of the recent and deeper history of this person. Back in a few years ago, I got some students together and said, you know, we need to bring awareness to this. And we came up with the notion that we needed to look history back in the face. And so we decided we would build a stair that would allow us to go up and look our monuments in the eye and read back to them their own, in this case, Cornwallis' own declaration, his racist declarations against the Mi'kmaq. And we built this kind of wooden stair. We didn't ask for any approvals. We planned that we would roll it into the park and invite the public to come up and speak to Cornwallis face to face and handed out the declaration that he had written and passed that essentially calling for the genocide of the Mi'kmaq. So here we are putting up the stair and speaking to Cornwallis face to face, and also informing anyone who cared to be by. We called in the media and so on to be part of it. And you know, there weren't immediate results on that one, but about a dozen years later, here he goes. And so, but we do have a role to play in setting history straight. Sorry, I hope I didn't take too much time. I don't have a, but I guess what I'm saying is that the university has a responsibility on this, and it's not like it's a side project that we do when it's convenient. I think it's the main project. It's the main project of life, and it's the main project of how and what we teach.
Thank you very much for giving us this enlightenment. Sorry, DeRico?
Could I add just a couple thoughts?
Yes, please.
So as folks were talking, just a couple things sort of came to mind that I just want to mention and kind of bring maybe some of my points back in relation to architecture itself. And so for me, in viewing architecture, to me, it equals, well, it can equal access in terms of community design. And I think about, you know, the question that sort of permeates for me is that what, you know, in the current social climate and landscape that we have right now with the BLM movement and racialized movements at the forefront of our thought, what is the positive architectural contribution to this conversation? Because certainly there is one. And when we think about the design of particular communities, we could think about North Preston, when Black loyalists were given less land than they originally were supposed to get, folks made a way where there seemingly was not a way, and created their sort of own architectural design of the community. We think about communities such as Hammond's Plains, communities such as Beachville. Black people and racialized folks made a way where there seemingly was not a way. And years later, community design began to push back and take away from those particular communities. And so, when I think about architecture has sort of shaped the world and affected communities of color in a whole host of different ways. Thinking about the construction and destruction of Black Wall Street, thinking about the Shelburne race riots, which is the first North American race riot the first race riot in history in North America in Shelburne, and then even right down to redlining when designing particular communities, and how people of color were not allowed to live in particular areas. And so, I think that, I'm clearly no architect, but thinking about what architecture can do, it can create access, and that's just one of the things that sort of keeps running through my head, is access. When we look at buildings and we look at gentrification, when we look at community design, think the Mulgrave Park community and the Uniacke Square community, very boxy, one way in, one way out, no flow for community traffic to walk in and out. And then think about other places within HRM. So I think architecture plays a massive role in the lives and livelihoods of people. And just the question that I sort of just put for folks to think about is, what is the architectural contribution positively moving forward now? Because the BLM movement and racism and discrimination, those conversations are going nowhere fast, and they're not going away. And how can we now take our minds and the architectural minds to then and reimagine what some of these communities can now look like? Because certainly we know that there has been damage that has been done in the past.
Just before you guys answer, I would like to add an extra question towards this. So someone from the audience asked a question, and I would like to add it to what DeRico just asked. So the question, I'm going to synthesize it because of time. It's basically, have there been any awareness, both good or bad, and how can we basically keep this momentum for public interest and equity issues and dealing with anti-racism, and how can that bring about real change in our professions? So yeah, so as DeRico asked, just add that to the overarching question that he's asked as well, just in an effort to also answer the audience's questions as well.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the number one, people they have to not shy away from it. They have to call it out when they see it. They have to speak to it when they see it. They have to engage with it in healthy ways. They have to offer solutions. Don't just speak about it, but offer solutions. And I love what Richard, was talking about in terms of architecture and the responsibility of people who are in planning and architecture to address history. Who thought you could have a library where you couldn't keep people out of it? The New Spring Garden Library is exactly that. And why is it that? Because people can see their place in it. There is a place for everybody in that library. And we see ourselves reflected, no matter who you are and where you're from, you see yourself reflected, in that library. And that, as Richard said, it only comes with consultation with the community. And that was a long time in the making, in saying, what do people really want in spaces? Africville is the signature Canadian piece of what not to do when planning, and it's not unlike many other Black communities where all the most undesirable things are put, in your backyard, in your front yard, on both sides of your house, So the things that make you cringe, the unhealthy things, the noisy things, the things that create an undesirable community and condition. And so when you're planning, are we thinking about, who are the people in that community? How is this going to affect them long-term and short-term? And what do they want? What does that community want? Gottingen Street is a prime example of that. When, all these, new, buildings started going up, the people of Gottingen Street went to bed scared every night because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to afford their rents in 5 years. Did the community want those things? No. Are they happening? Yes. So where does it stop? And who are the voices that will protect certain areas so that people can live in comfort and know that they've got a future in their communities that they've spent a generation or two building?
Well, I started typing out the answer to the question that was on there. So I just put half of sort of what I was answering that question. So I'll speak a bit to it. Is that so? I would say that substantial change has not happened. Certainly, change has happened. If you look back, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, young people of the day were having the exact same conversation, the same thoughts that I or we were having today. And when I talk about awareness, or when the question is sort of asked is around awareness, is that awareness for who? Because Black folks have always known that there's been injustices and wrongdoings happening in the system. And so it's not awareness for me because I've always known this. And even in terms of the BLM movement, I say this, and certainly hear me out, is that Black lives matter in its essence. Black people have always known that their lives have mattered. And so Black lives matter is not necessarily for the Black community, because Black people have always known that their lives have mattered. And so who is that phrase for and its nuance to then be a part of the conversation in the movement moving forward. So awareness certainly, I think, has risen, but substantial change, I would say no. Change, yes.
Yeah, I have to agree, DeRico. I just want to, just quickly say, in 1960, people saw images and people were appalled at images to some extent. Today, the difference is that people aren't just seeing images. They're seeing things play out in real time, the way that it's actually happening. And now the narrative can't be changed. It can't be changed. Somebody can't reconstruct that into something that it's not. And so it was easy to create a narrative that those people must have done something wrong because they did go to jail. So they must have been wrong. Well, now we know that that is not necessarily, well, we've always known that, but we had no proof. We had no way of showing it. And after a while, it just gets so exhausting, and you exhaust your mental, your financial, every capacity that you have becomes so depleted that eventually, I'm surprised that our ancestors didn't walk around like zombies at some point, because, again, we have much more to fight with. We have a way of really sharing true information today and capturing, real information. It is different times in that way. And so I'm always hopeful. I'm always hopeful that that things will change much more faster, and in a real way that makes a real impact before my generation is gone. And you know, I'm not young, so you know, that conversation around change takes time has always been something that just, I hate that phrase because I know it's not true. I know every one of us could get a phone call tonight that would change our lives forever. I know that when there is will, change can happen. If my grandmother were alive today and saw, listen, I am for legalizing marijuana, but we could legalize marijuana before we could show and tell people why it's necessary to be nice to each other. I find that astounding. You know, and every time I'm invited to a federal conversation, in fact, 3 years ago, I asked, please do not invite me anymore, because the same conversation happens. It's just new people hosting it, right? So the conversation hasn't changed. It takes will. It takes will on the part of people to just take a chunk of that and do what you can to change it.
Perfect. So I think we have one last question. If you guys can quickly answer it. Well, certainly, I don't know if you try to answer that, DeRico, already. But the question was from Lisa, and it goes, from my understanding, there are a few Black First Nations or people with accessibility challenges as students at Dalhousie University. In terms of local communities in Nova Scotia, it is very hard to have our built environment change without inclusions in the School of Planning and Architecture. Do you have advice for how this can change? Anyone? I guess we'll start with Richard, since you're the architect here.
Yeah, we could start by going out more into these communities. As you know, often it was easier for me to work on these issues as a guest professor somewhere else. And Dalhousie, it was, I'm not saying, you know, I'm not there anymore, by the way, so I don't want to judge in any way what's happening there now. But I don't know if anyone goes to the Prestons or to the reserves and talks to young students about what architects and planners do and how what we do might impinge on their community. I think too, again, making that point about the role that the university has to play, we should be working with these communities, not just as architects and planners, but because the university is multidisciplinary, why can't we go in with, as we were able to do in the Minneapolis example, with historians, economists, lawyers, all those people that normally, that expertise that isn't affordable to small communities. Maybe once they graduate, you know, we end up being in the service of so-called developers or the undevelopers and the moneyed segment of society. But at least as academics who have a means of support, publicly funded, we're working with the public. We have a kind of obligation to take these things on and first of all, make people aware of the resource, make young people aware of the potential and how start to open those doors and show them, even show them where these doors are that need to be opened, and then start to have dialogues, you know, with the people there. I don't think we come there with solutions, obviously, because I certainly don't have any, but we do have a lot of good minds, young minds, the best minds, and we can put them at the disposal of some of these communities and work with young people in the communities. I mean, the answer obviously is the children and the youth, right? I mean, my generation, forget it. But and so we have to start to make those connections, even just to get the talk going and show them where the doors are and then work at opening those doors.
Perfect. So I will sort of just quickly kind of echo what DeRico just wrote in the comments and also speak from my own experience as an architecture student as well. I think one of the things that would help is also diversifying the kind of education we get, because architecture itself is very Eurocentric. And we all know, because we are all global brothers, or we are now a global citizen because of the internet and whoever we meet. So education from a very diverse background would be helpful for students, and also like getting them at a younger age. I do know that we have a program. It's run by James Foreign, and it's in connection with Body Day Learning Center and Institute. Sorry, and we go to students of color who are in grade 9 and who are in that critical year where they make decisions for their life, and we try to introduce them to what architecture is. And I think that kind of those kind of programs moving year round and year long would be helpful in terms of introducing kids of color, indigenous people, that there is a life outside of just the generic accounting, scientists, business work, that architecture really needs their voices because they're the ones who are changing community as well. Oh, and James said business is German as well. Just to add that. But yeah, so thank you very much, you guys, for the excellent discussions and being amazing panelists. I want to thank you, Juanita. I want to thank you, Richard. I want to thank you, DeRico, for being here and taking the time to answer our questions and to have this great engaging discussions. So
Yeah.
I'm going to head it over to Lisa again.
Thank you so much, EC, and thanks so much to our panelists. I do, maybe just to close, want to underscore a comment that DeRico made in here about this last question here. And I think that the point you make is really important, that the term kind of recruitment, I think what you're saying is maybe it's a little bit transactional, and maybe we need to think about it in a more kind of longer game in terms of this is about if we're really taking these issues to heart and we're really concerned with it, we should be concerned with creating relationships.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just think that I was thinking about this the other day and talking with school about recruitment and how can we make our programs and our university and what we're doing attractive rather than us having to be reactive and recruit. So reframing the thought process around building relationships rather than we're going to recruit. We're going to meet people, we're going to build relationships, we're going to meet the moms, the aunties, the uncles, we're going to build relationships rather than we're going to find students so we can get them to our university and spend money.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think those are really important kind of points to underscore, to be really aware of. What does this relationship look like and kind of what's behind it? So yeah, I definitely appreciate that comment. I see that Dean Newhook would like the floor for a second.
Thank you, Lisa. And first, I want to thank both the EDI committee for taking the initiative on starting this series, and equally as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, thank our panelists and our moderator, Izzy, for the event this evening. I did want to mention something, a general thing first. The Winters Lecture Series is a very old concept. It goes actually back to the Tons days. It was envisioned, as many things were back then, as a traditional university lecture. You'd have somebody come in, they would impart their knowledge, everybody would clap and say what a great session it was. I think what we're creating here now, this sort of re-inauguration of it, where it is much more of a discussion, a dialogue, and an opportunity to stimulate thought and different processes and having, to use the word that's been used quite a bit, have an engaged discussion. I think this is a really worthwhile and powerful forum. So I thank, again, I thank everybody who's involved in organizing and participating, because I think we're moving in the right direction for something that should happen in the academy, is these styles of discussions. And I also thank each of our speakers because, I know personally I've taken things away. I mean, DeRico, actually, you've gave me a different perspective on systemic racism, thinking about its origins and separating the inception and design of the system from the people in it. I mean, that's a different way of thinking about it. Again, community engagement from all of our speakers, very, very powerful thing. Engagement early and engagement with broad groups of people, relationships, all those terms are very, very important. But I also think one of the messages, maybe stated directly or indirectly, is if you make this part of your value system, then you have choices, whether you're in the academy educating students, whether you're in practice as an architect or a planner, or in my case, I'm actually an engineer. If these are part of your value systems and you have choices in your practice to actually show leadership and embed them in the way you go about approaching solutions. And, I'm sure we could go on and on. There's many more different things, but I think, again, I just want to thank you. I'm very pleased to see this dialogue happening, because this is also part, I think, of the broader, how do we change the academy? How do we change the faculty and the dialogues happening? And having the dialogue is maybe the first step to finding some of the solutions that were asked in one of the questions about how do we get more participation in, more students in, more participation here. So thank you all. Thank you, Lisa, for just a couple of moments to speak.
Thank you very much, Dean Newhook. I think that was a great way to end the panel. Thank the whole audience for joining us. Of course, thank you to the panelists for your time and your expertise. So I want to, before we close here, just remind you all that this lecture series is going to continue with speakers and panelists through March of 2021. On November 18th, we'll have architect Craig Wilkins. So he'll be joining us to talk about the role of race in the culture of the architecture profession, and also how Black communities shape urban spaces through what he and others have coined hip hop architecture. And the 2021 events of the series are also going to feature some exciting guests. So people like Mindy Fullilove, a public health and urban planning scholar, Ingrid Waldron on campus here at Dal, Jennifer Llewellyn, and Frank Palermo, among others. So those are things to look forward to and keep an eye out for. So thanks again so much for joining us. And of course, thanks to the panelists again, and to the Robert H. Winters Fund for supporting these types of events. So we hope that you're going to continue to join us